Thomas Red Willow did not reach for a handshake when Elias Many Horses came through the gate. He reached for the rifle leaning against the porch rail. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. He only laid one weathered hand across the stock the way a man lays his hand on something that belongs to him, something he has used before and would use again if the world gave him cause. The morning wind came down cold from the Rocky Mountain front, sliding over the open Blackfeet plains, stirring dust along the yard and making the gate chain tap softly against the post. Elias stopped 10 paces inside the yard. His boots were worn white at the seams. His coat had been patched at one elbow. His hat was in both hands, and the horse behind him stood with its head low, steam rising faintly from its nostrils. He had the look of a man who had ridden a long way with very little in his pockets and a great deal on his mind. Thomas looked him over once, not quickly, not kindly. "You came for my daughter," Thomas said. It was not a question. Elias met his eyes. He was young, but there was nothing boyish in the way he stood. Fear might have been in him somewhere, but it did not reach his face. "Yes, sir," he said. "I did." Thomas's fingers tightened once on the rifle stock. Then, "God help you," he said, "because I won't." The first time Elias had crossed Red Willow land, he had not come for Mara. He had come for a broken fence. The flood that spring had run hard off the hills and torn through the low draw between Red Willow Ranch and Old Harlan Bell's place, ripping out cedar posts, twisting wire, and leaving 40 yards of boundary open to whatever cattle had more curiosity than sense. Bell had sent Elias out with a staple driver fresh wire and the plain instruction to fix their side before the herd discovered the gap. Elias rode out before sunup with the grass still wet and the sky pale over the eastern plains. He found the fence worse than Bell had described. 3 posts were gone entirely. 2 more leaned like tired men. Wire lay in the mud, shining where the flood had scraped it clean. Red Willow cattle stood on one side. Bell cattle stood on the other. Both herds watched him with the calm expectation of animals waiting for human failure. Elias climbed down, rolled his sleeves, and went to work. He fixed Bell's side first because that was what he had been sent to do. Then he stood there with the staple driver in his hand and looked at the Red Willow side hanging open. No hand came riding from the ranch. No dust rose from that direction. No voice called across the draw. He could have packed up. He could have told Bell that he had done his half. Instead, he set another post. Leaving a job half finished sat wrong inside him. It always had. He could not have explained it in a way that satisfied most men. Some things needed doing because the world leaned crooked when they were not done. A fence was one of those things. By noon, sweat had darkened the back of his shirt. By mid-afternoon, his hands were sore and nicked from wire. By the time he pulled the last strand tight, the whole line stood straight from post to post, no side favored, no side neglected. That was when he heard boots in the grass behind him. He turned. Mara Red Willow came from the cottonwoods, walking unhurried direct as if the land had told her where to put her feet long before she asked it. She was 19 or near it, dark-haired and broad-built with a strong body that did not apologize for itself. She carried her weight the way some people carry authority, naturally and without invitation. Her face was serious, not hard, and her eyes took in the fence, the tools, the wire, the post holes, and Elias himself in one steady measure. "You're not Bell's old foreman," she said. "No, ma'am. Elias Many Horses. I work his north section." She looked again at the fence. "Our hand didn't come." "No, ma'am. You fixed our side anyway. Seemed wrong to leave it open." She was quiet then, not empty quiet, thinking quiet. Elias had known enough talkers in his life to respect a person who chose silence before speech. Mara stepped closer and tested the top wire with 2 fingers. She did it like someone who knew the feel of good tension. Then she walked the line, looking at every staple, every post, every place where the ground had been disturbed and tamped down again. "You set that corner deep," she said. Flood took the first one easy, figured the second ought to argue harder. Something changed near her mouth. Not a smile, but the place where one might have started if she had allowed it. "My father owns this land. I know. Most men who know that don't cross onto it without asking. I didn't come to cross it," Elias said. "I came to close it." She looked at him then fully. "Are you afraid of Thomas Red Willow?" "Not yet." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Not yet. I haven't done anything that warrants it." For a moment, the only sound was wind moving through the grass and cattle shifting beyond the fence. Mara bent, picked up a coil of spare wire he had not yet gathered, and set it beside his toolbox. She did it without asking, without making a show of helping the natural movement of a person who saw work and put her hand to it. That told Elias more about her than a full hour of conversation might have. My mother used to say a ranch survives on small things done right, Mara said. She sounds like she knew ranching. She knew everything that mattered. Mara's voice did not break, but something in it closed a door. She passed when I was 11. Elias lowered his eyes for a moment, not out of discomfort, but respect. I'm sorry. Mara nodded once, accepting the words without inviting more. After that, there was work that needed doing. Looks like you did it. She studied him again as if deciding whether the remark was pity praise or simple observation. It was not optional. Most useful things aren't. This time the corner of her mouth moved and stayed a heartbeat longer. From the rise beyond the cottonwoods, an older woman watched them. Ruth Spotted Elk had been walking back from the lower creek with a basket of willow bark and bundled cloth under one arm. She was small, bent only slightly by age, with silver hair braided down her back and eyes that had seen too much to be hurried by anything. She had known Mara's mother had sat with her in sickness, had helped wrap the house in quiet after the burial. Ruth came down after Elias had gathered his tools and swung into the saddle. Mara stood by the fence, watching him ride away longer than she likely meant to. Ruth looked at the repaired line. Belle sent him for one side, she said. Mara did not turn. He fixed both. Ruth touched the top wire, feeling the clean pull of it. A man who fixes a fence that isn't his may be poor in his pocket, she said, but he is not poor in his soul. Mara looked away toward the open plain. You sound like my mother, only when I am right. Mara gave no answer, but the words remained. They stayed with her through supper, through the evening ledgers, through the checking of the South Trough before dark. They returned 3 days later when Elias rode back, claiming he had left a staple driver wedged near the corner post. The tool was there, so was Mara. He retrieved it, but did not leave quickly. She was tightening a section that did not strictly need tightening. He noticed. She noticed that he noticed. You often forget tools, she asked. No, ma'am. You often come back for them when I need them. And did you need that one today? He looked at the staple driver in his hand. Eventually. A short sound escaped her before she could stop it. Not much of a laugh, barely more than breath, but it was enough. Elias thought about that sound for the rest of the week. He came back again for a washout near the creek, then for a loose post, then because one of Belle's calves had wandered too near the line. Each reason had work attached to it, but each reason grew thinner. Mara never invited him. She never sent him away either. They spoke in pieces. He learned that she kept the ranch accounts because Thomas trusted her figures more than his own. She knew every water source on Red Willow land and which ones froze first. She could read a deed description as easily as most men read a feed bill. She had been doing useful things since childhood, and usefulness had become both her armor and her language. She learned that Elias had no land, no cattle, no inheritance, and no habit of pretending otherwise. His father had died when he was 15. His mother had remarried a decent man in Wyoming, and Elias had come north looking for work when work where he stood had run out. He owned one horse, a saddle, a bedroll, a knife, and a few dollars that never seemed to stay long. None of that should have made him stand taller. Somehow it did. On the 4th visit, Mara found him resetting a post that had begun to lean. You are going to wear a path into this grass, she said. My horse likes the rote. Does your horse have opinions about Red Willow land? He has not tried to turn back yet. That is a low measure of judgment. It is, Montana, Elias said. A man learns to respect any creature willing to keep moving forward. There it was again, that small unwilling laugh. She turned away afterward as if laughter were something that had slipped from her pocket and she was considering whether to pick it up. Elias kept his eyes on the post. He had been raised not to stare at things a person had not meant to show. By the time Thomas Red Willow came for him, Elias already knew he was in trouble. Thomas arrived at Belle's bunkhouse near dusk when the sky had gone red behind the mountains, and the yard smelled of horse sweat, cooling iron, and supper smoke. He sat in a chair outside the bunkhouse with a rifle laid across his knees. Not pointed, not lifted, only present. Elias rode in from the north section and pulled his horse to a stop. He looked at Thomas, not the rifle. Mr. Red Willow. Many horses, Thomas said. Get down. Elias dismounted, tied his horse, and stood before him with his gloves in one hand. Thomas looked him over with the patience of a man judging weatherstock and character by the same old instinct. You have been on my fence line 5 times in 4 weeks. 7, Elias said. 2 had good reason. Thomas's eyes sharpened. And the other 5 reasons, Elias said. not good ones. Silence settled between them. My daughter is not land to be claimed by a poor man with a pretty answer. No, sir. She is not lonely enough to be fooled by attention. No, sir. She is not soft enough to need saving. I know that. Thomas leaned forward slightly. What do you know? Elias took his time because the answer deserved care. I know she sees bad work from 30 yards away. I know she carries more of that ranch than most men would admit. I know she speaks plain because lies waste time. I know she helped me gather wire without being asked because she saw it needed doing. I know she laughed once and looked surprised by it. Thomas went still. Elias continued quieter. I know men probably look at her and think they understand what kind of woman she is before she opens her mouth. They are fools. The rifle did not move, but something in Thomas's face did. Not softness, not approval, something earlier than either. What are you worth? Thomas asked. Elias answered without shame and without pride. Right now, about $14. Thomas's jaw tightened. Land. No, sir. Cattle, no, sir. Family money, no, sir. Then you came to my daughter with nothing. Elias held his gaze. No, sir. I came with very little. That is not the same thing. For the first time, Thomas stood. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, gray at the temples, with a face that had learned not to spend expressions carelessly. Behind him, the last light lay across the yard like old copper. You think there is a difference? Yes, sir. Thomas picked up the rifle, not threatening now, only taking back what was his. Then you had better learn what winter does to a man, he said, because my daughter is not a prize for summer hands. He turned toward his horse, then stopped. One more thing. Elias waited. Mara will tell you no. Elias's throat tightened, though his face did not change. I expect she might. She will tell you no because she has learned to protect herself. If you ride off the first time she says it, you will have told her everything she already feared about men. And if I don't ride off, Thomas mounted slowly and looked down at him. Then we will see whether you are stubborn, foolish, or something better. He rode away without another word. Elias stood in the yard until the hoofbeats faded into the evening. The air had gone cold. Somewhere inside the bunkhouse, men were laughing over supper, but the sound seemed far away. He looked north toward Red Willow Land, toward the fence line where a woman with serious eyes had measured his work and found it worth speaking of. Then he picked up his gloves. There was work to do before morning. Elias. Many horses slept little that night. The bunkhouse had gone quiet long before midnight. The other men sunk deep into the hard sleep of those who had worked from sunup and expected to do it again. Elias lay on his cot with his hands folded over his chest and watched the rafters disappear into darkness. Outside, the wind moved across the yard and touched the walls lightly like a hand testing whether the building meant to stand. Thomas Red Willow's words had not left him. Mara will tell you no. There were many things a man could prepare for. Broken fence, flooded creek, a horse gone lame, a winter storm crossing open land. But there was no clean way to prepare for a woman saying no when some hopeful, foolish part of him had already begun building a small future out of fence lines and short conversations. At first light, he rose before the others, pulled on his boots, and walked outside. The eastern sky was pale, and the grass held a thin silver frost. He saddled his horse in silence, checked the cinch twice, and rode toward Red Willow Land with no excuse good enough to fool either one of them. He found Mara at the lower trough, crouched beside the float valve with her sleeves rolled and her dark braid over one shoulder. She heard the horse and did not look up right away. My father came to see you, she said. Yes, ma'am. He told me he would. Elias dismounted and stopped at a distance that gave her room. He said you would tell me no. Now she looked up. He was right. The words struck plainly. No cruelty in them. No trembling either. Mara Red Willow had a way of laying truth on the ground between two people and expecting them both to look at it. Elias nodded. I figured he might be. You don't know me, she said. I know what I've seen. You've seen a woman fixing fences and checking water. Yes, ma'am. That is where it started. It is not enough. No. She set the wrench beside the trough and stood. In the morning light, she looked larger than most women and steadier than most men. Her coat hanging open, her hands reddened from cold iron. There was no softness offered in her face, but Elias had come to understand that with Mara, softness was not absent. It was guarded. You have nothing, she said. I'm not saying that to wound you. I'm saying it because it is true. I have watched women marry promises and spend the rest of their lives paying for them. I'm not foolish, Elias. I've never had room to be. He took that in. Her use of his name did something to him, but he did not let it show. I would not ask you to be foolish. Then what are you asking? The wind moved between them cold and clean, carrying the smell of wet earth and cattle. Elias looked at the trough, the fence beyond it, the ranch house standing solid in the distance, and then back to her. I'm not asking you to believe I have wealth. I'm asking for time to show you that what I have is not nothing. Mara's face did not change, but her eyes held on his longer than before. That is still a poor man's answer, she said. Yes, ma'am, and you are still here. Yes, ma'am. She picked up the wrench again and turned back to the valve. I will tell you no more than once. I expect so. My father will make it hard. I expect that too. Men have left for less. I believe it. Mara tightened the valve, wiped her hand on her skirt, and spoke without turning. Then go check the south fence before your horse freezes standing there. A section was loose yesterday. Elias almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. The second no came 8 days later, though it arrived wearing another man's coat. Silas Crowder rode into Bell's yard in the afternoon when the sun was high and the dust lay gold over everything. He was tall, clean-shaven, and handsome, in the polished way of a man who had never needed to ask twice. His horse was better bred than any working animal needed to be, and his saddle carried silver that caught the light. Many horses, Silas said, as if they were old friends. Elias was at the pump washing fence tar from his hands. Crowder, I hear you've been useful over at Red Willow. Fence work. Silas smiled. Thomas Red Willow owns good land, yes. And Mara Red Willow is a practical woman. Elias dried his hands slowly. She is. A woman like that understands what makes a future. Cattle, acreage, money enough to keep a roof sound when the weather turns mean. Silas leaned against the pump rail. She is not the kind to gamble on a cowboy with his pockets turned inside out. Elias looked at him directly. Did she send you to tell me that? The smile stayed, but something behind it cooled. No, I came because some men need the plain shape of things drawn for them. I see the shape. I see a man speaking of security when he means ownership? Silas's jaw shifted once. Careful, I am. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Silas straightened, brushed dust from his sleeve, and mounted. Talk is cheap, many horses. Yes, Elias said. That is why I try not to waste much. Silas rode away with his back straight, and his pride touched in a place where pride often becomes dangerous. Elias went to Red Willow the next morning. Mara was in the barn working over the ledger at a rough plank table where the light fell best. She did not look surprised when he stepped into the doorway. Silas came to see you, she said. He did, and I am still here. She closed the ledger. Silas does not hear no because he has never needed to. You do not hear no because you have decided not to. Those are not the same thing. No, Elias said. They are not. I have not decided which one troubles me more. I hope you take your time. The corner of her mouth moved, but only slightly. I usually do. The third no came on a Sunday. Elias rode to the Red Willow porch with his hat in his hands and dust on his boots. Thomas was not in sight. Mara stood on the steps, arms folded, watching him approach as if she had known he would come and had already decided how far he would get. I came to ask if I might take supper with your family, Elias said. No, Mara said. The answer was clean and immediate. Elias lowered his head once. Yes, ma'am. He turned his horse and rode 40 yards. Next Sunday she called. He stopped. Mara still stood on the porch, arms folded, expression unchanged. My father eats at 6, coffee black. He does not like a man talking over his food. Elias turned in the saddle. Yes, ma'am, do not be late. He was not. The following Sunday he arrived 10 minutes before 6. Thomas sat on the porch with coffee in one hand and no rifle in sight, which somehow did not make him less dangerous. He watched Elias tie his horse and come up the steps. Inside the house was plain and orderly. The table was set with no decoration beyond clean dishes, hot bread, beans, beef, and coffee strong enough to stand in. Ruth Spotted Elk sat near the hearth mending a sleeve. She looked at Elias once, then returned to her needlework as if she had already taken his measure and found no immediate need to announce it. Supper passed with its kind of quiet that made careless men nervous. Thomas asked questions. Elias answered them. Wyoming, his father, work, money, what a man owed land he did not own, what a man owed a woman he meant to court. Elias did not decorate his answers. Near the end, Thomas set down his cup. Cold Knife Pasture, he said. Mara's hand stilled beside her plate. Elias had heard the name. Every hand in the county had. It lay north toward the broken teeth of the mountains where the wind came hard and winter made men reconsider whatever pride had carried them there. What about it? Elias asked. I hold the winter section there. 212 head will run it this year. Line shack is sound enough. Fences need watching. Water freezes early. Men quit it. Thomas looked at him. I need a man to winter there. The room went still. No wages, Thomas said. The section does not earn against wages. You keep the herd alive. The fences standing the shack sound and come back in spring with an honest accounting. Then we will have a different conversation. Mara looked at her father. Not angry, not surprised. Hurt, perhaps, though she would not let it rise far enough for anyone to handle. Elias felt the weight of it settle over the table. Cold knife was not a chore. It was a season-long judgment. When do I leave? He asked. Thomas studied him for a long time. First hard frost. Ruth's needle paused. Mara looked down at her plate. Nothing more was said about it. Later, when the dishes were cleared and Thomas had gone outside to check something that likely did not need checking, Ruth found Mara in the kitchen folding a towel already folded. You do not have to like the test, Ruth said. I do not. But you know why your father said it. Mara said nothing. Ruth moved closer, her old face soft in the lamplight. Love does not always come carrying sweet words. Sometimes it checks the stove, counts the flour, and sends a man with wool enough to survive the wind. I have not agreed to love. No, Ruth said, only to worry. Mara looked at her sharply, but Ruth had already turned away. The first hard frost came 3 weeks later. Before dawn, Elias stood in the red willow yard with his horse saddled and his bedroll tied tight. Thomas checked his gear without praise. Extra rope, dried beans, coffee, sealant, ammunition, wool blankets. You forget something out there, Thomas said. The land will remember. Yes, sir. Elias signed the winter contract against his saddle. He was halfway to the gate when the porch door opened. Elias. He turned. Mara stood in her heavy coat hair loose around her shoulders, the dark of it moving in the wind. She looked as if she had come out before giving herself permission. 30 yards lay between them, frozen ground, cold air, everything unsaid. Come back, she said. Not a plea, not quite an order, something harder for her than either. Elias held her gaze. I will. He turned his horse north. He didn't know that in the inside pocket of his coat, folded small beneath the contract Mara had hidden, 4 words in her careful hand. The stovepipe. Check it. Cold Knife pasture was 22 miles north of Red Willow Ranch, but by the time Elias' many horses reached it, the distance felt like more than miles. It felt like a line crossed. Behind him were the ranch house, the porch. Thomas read Willow's measuring eyes and Mara standing in the frost with her hair loose around her shoulders, telling him to come back in a voice that had cost her something. Ahead of him lay high open country gray grass, black timber stone ridges, and a wind that came down from the mountains with no kindness in it. The line shack sat low against a rise half hidden from the worst of the weather by a stand of old cottonwoods bent permanently east. It was small, squared, and plain with a roof patched in 2 places and a stovepipe standing above it like one black finger lifted against the white sky. Elias dismounted and stood for a moment with his hand on his horse's neck. Well, he said softly, this is where we find out. The horse blew into the cold and lowered his head. Inside the shack smelled of old smoke-dust iron and the dry emptiness of a place that had waited too long between men. There was a narrow bunk, a rough table, a stove, a shelf with 2 chipped cups, and a window facing the pasture. The walls were sound. The floorboards creaked but held. Thomas Red Willow had not sent him to a ruin. That mattered. Elias unpacked only what had to be unpacked. Then he started a fire, checked the stove, draft-walked the outside walls, looked over the roof patching, and rode out to find the cattle before the afternoon light gave up. 212 head were scattered across 3 sections of rough northern grazing. They were good cattle, red and black and white-faced, already carrying thicker coats, moving with the resigned patience of animals that knew winter better than men did. Elias counted them once, then again, then marked the number in a small journal he had brought, because his father had once told him a man who trusted memory with cattle was inviting trouble to supper. By dark, he knew the first shape of the place. The western ridge caught wind and would drift bad after snow. The lower creek still ran but shallow. The north gully would flood when snow broke loose from the high ground, and the east boundary fence had 3 weak stretches that needed attention before real weather came. He returned to the shack after sundown with his face raw from wind and his hands aching from cold. He ate beans from a tin plate and sat close to the stove while the dark pressed against the window. Only then did he unfold the contract to read it again. Not because he had forgotten the terms. A man did not forget terms like those. No wages, cattle alive, fences standing, shack sound, honest accounting in spring. He read it because words on paper had weight, and on the first night alone, weight was useful. When he folded the contract, another paper slipped from beneath it, small, folded twice. He stared at it for a moment before picking it up. The handwriting was careful, straight, and spare. The stovepipe. Check it. 4 words. No name. It did not need one. Elias sat very still. The stove gave a low iron tick as heat settled into it. Outside, wind moved against the wall. Mara had put it there. Sometime before dawn, sometime when he had been signing Thomas's contract or checking his saddlebags. She had given him no speech, no keepsake, no ribbon to tie around his wrist. She had given him a warning. He stood at once. The lower joint looked sound from the floor. So did the first elbow. He dragged the table under the pipe, climbed up, and ran his hand carefully along the seam near the second bend. At first he felt nothing. Then under his fingers the faintest breath of cold air. A crack. Hairline, easy to miss, dangerous in a hard wind. He climbed down, found the sealant Thomas had listed among the supplies, and packed the seam until the draft held true. He checked it again, then again. When he was done, he sat at the table with Mara's note in front of him. That note was not softness, as most people named it. It was better. It was care, made practical. It was worry disciplined into usefulness. It was Mara Red Willow speaking in the only language she trusted. He folded the paper and put it in the inside pocket of his coat close to his chest. November came hard. The first snow did not fall so much as arrive sideways. Elias moved the herd down from the upper slope 2 days before it hit. Not because any man told him to, but because the sky had gone low and the wind had shifted in a way he did not like. By the time the storm broke, the cattle were bunched along the south draw where the land gave them some shelter. He spent 3 days between the shack and the herd breaking ice, checking drift, keeping the weaker animals from being shouldered too far out. His horse worked without complaint, which Elias appreciated more than he could say aloud. A man alone comes to value quiet loyalty wherever he finds it. On the third night, he came in with snow frozen in the seams of his coat and his legs stiff from cold. He fed the stove, stripped off wet socks, and sat with his bare feet near the heat until pain returned to them in hot needles. He looked toward the stovepipe. Sound. Because of 4 words. By December, Cold Knife had stopped being a place and become a condition. The cold lived in everything. It lived in the water bucket, the saddle leather, the hinges, the bedroll, the breath in his beard when he woke. The silence was worse than the cold some nights. It filled the shack until every small sound seemed too large, the stove settling the horse shifting outside his own spoon against tin. One evening, after riding the east boundary in a wind sharp enough to make his eyes water, Elias stood outside the shack and looked across the white broken country. He thought of Thomas's rifle, Mara's no Silas, Crowder's polished smile, and the porch where she had said, "Come back." Then he thought clear as spoken words. Winter does not care what a man promises. It only waits to see what he does when no one is there to praise him. After that, he stopped measuring the days by hope. He measured them by work. At Red Willow Ranch, Mara measured the same winter differently. She knew the shape of Cold Knife from Map's cattle reports and her father's old stories. She knew which storms would hit the pasture first and which winds would cut down from the west hard enough to blind a man riding. She did not speak of Elias more than necessary, but she checked the sky every morning before she checked the ledger. Ruth spotted elk noticed. Ruth noticed most things. "You watch the clouds like they owe you news," Ruth said one afternoon from the kitchen table where she was peeling apples with a small bone-handled knife. Mara kept writing figures in the account book. The herd is north. Weather matters. The herd has been north before. This winter is early. So is worry. Mara set down her pencil. "I'm not worried." Ruth did not look up. Watching the sky for another person is one of the oldest kinds of prayer. Mara closed the ledger too firmly. "I am checking weather." "Yes," Ruth said. "That is what I said." Silas Crowder came 2 days later wearing good wool and a pleasant face. Thomas was out on the south section. Mara received Silas in the barn because she had accounts spread across the workbench and no intention of moving them for him. "Miss Red Willow," Silas said, smiling. "Cold day. It is December." His smile thinned, then returned. "I heard many horses went north." "You heard correctly. Cold Knife is hard country. Men with more experience have found it unfriendly." Mara looked down at her ledger. "The country is not required to be friendly." "No. but a practical woman plans for outcomes. She raised her eyes. What outcome are you hoping I plan for Mr. Crowder? His pleasantness held but only on the surface. I only mean winter changes things, then we will see what changes. Silas left with his hat tipped and his pride wounded in the quiet way pride hates most. A week later, Thomas received notice that Silas Crowder had filed a formal inquiry into the northern grazing rights. Mara read the paper twice. He is not asking because he does not know, she said. Thomas took the notice back. No, he is creating a record. Yes, for what Thomas looked toward the north window where the mountain stood hidden behind cloud. We will find out. In January, Elias found the first pulled posts. They stood along the east boundary where the fence ran near a shallow break in the land. 12 feet of wire sagged low, and 2 posts had been worked loose from the frozen ground. Not snapped, not heaved by frost, pulled. Elias crouched and studied the base of the first post. The soil had been disturbed recently. The top crust had frozen, but beneath it the dirt showed rough and broken, not lifted clean by weather. He stood and looked east. Nothing moved but wind. He thought of Silas Crowder. Then he thought of the cattle. Suspicion could wait. A broken fence could not. It took him 4 hours to set the line right. 4 hours of iron-hard, ground-stiff fingers wire that fought him and cold that crawled up his sleeves. When he finished, the fence stood tight again. Back at the shack, he opened his journal. January 11th, east boundary. 2 posts pulled from ground. Wire sagged but not cut. Soil disturbance recent. Not consistent with frost heave. Repaired by sundown. He did not write Silas's name. Facts first, names later. 3 more times before February ended, he found damage on the same boundary. Posts pulled, wire loosened, always in weather bad enough to make repairs miserable. Always where cattle might drift if he missed it. He documented every incident. In town, Deputy Jonah Pike heard about the grazing inquiry from the county clerk and about the fence trouble from one of Bell's hands who had ridden close enough to see fresh postwork along the red willow line. Jonah was a quiet man, half Blackfeet by his mother, and raised among trails before he ever pinned on a badge. He had learned that land trouble rarely began with a gun. Usually, it began with a man moving something small and waiting to see who noticed. He told Thomas as much outside the mercantile. If your winter man is writing things down, Jonah said, tell him not to stop. Thomas looked north. He is alone up there. Jonah nodded. Then paper may be the only witness he has. February brought the worst storm. It came low and mean with wind that erased the ground and snow that made distance meaningless. Elias had moved the herd south before it hit, but on the second day, 2 cows and 1 heifer drifted toward the north gully. He found the cows by sound more than sight and pushed them back. The heifer was farther down, caught where the slope dropped sharp. He should have waited for the wind to ease. He knew that later. At the time he went. By the time he reached the gully, the heifer was down too long and too cold. He tried. He roped. He pulled. He cursed once, not loud, and only because the wind took it. In the end, he left her there and rode back half-frozen, knowing the difference between effort and outcome and hating it. That night, he wrote the loss plainly. February 18th. 1 heifer lost North Gully during blizzard. I made wrong call on timing. Went out too late in worsening conditions. Would wait for visibility if faced with same again. He stared at the sentence a long time before closing the journal. By March, the light changed. The cold remained, but its teeth had loosened. Water began to speak under ice. The cattle spread more easily. The wind still cut, but it no longer felt eternal. Elias counted the herd, counted again. 211. The fences stood. The shack held. The stovepipe was sound. On the first clear morning of April, he packed his bedroll, folded the contract, the journal, and Mara's note into his coat, and saddled his horse. Before leaving, he rode once more to the east boundary. The repaired posts stood straight in the thawing ground. Beyond them lay the disputed silence of open land and whatever hand had worked against him in the dark. Elias rested one gloved hand on the top wire. I said I would come back, he said. Then he turned his horse south toward Red Willow Ranch, carrying 1 dead heifer, 4 damaged fences, and 6 months of winter written in his own hand. Elias, many horses, rode into Red Willow Ranch on a Tuesday morning with spring mud on his horse's legs and 6 months of winter cut into his face. Thomas Red Willow was in the yard kneeling beside the lower gate with a wrench in one hand and a rusted bracket on the ground beside him. He looked up when he heard the horse, but he did not rise at once. He studied Elias from where he knelt, taking in the leaner cheeks, the weather-cracked hands, the coat worn thin at the cuffs, the horse standing tired but sound. Then Thomas stood. "Morrison," he almost said, out of some old habit that did not belong to this place or this man. He corrected himself before the word left his mouth. "Many horses. Mr. Red Willow." Elias dismounted slowly, not because he wanted to make a show of stiffness, but because his legs had spent too many months riding cold ground and sleeping narrow. He untied the journal from his saddlebag and held it out. 211 head, he said. Lost one heifer in the February blizzard. North Gully. The rest are alive and in good condition. Fences are standing. Shack is sound. Stovepipe is sealed. Water lines held after the thaw. Thomas took the journal but did not open it yet. "One lost," he said. "Yes, sir. You could have started with the 211 alive." "I could have." Thomas looked at him a long moment. "But you didn't." "No, sir." The kitchen was warm when they went inside. The table was the same plain table Elias remembered from supper before the frost scrubbed clean, scarred by years of work strong enough to hold bad news and good coffee without complaint. Thomas opened the journal and began to read. He didn't skim. That was not his way. Elias sat across from him with both hands resting on his knees. The room held the sound of paper turning, the low breath of the hearth, and the occasional shift of a horse outside. Thomas read the cattle counts first, then the weather notes, then the water reports. His face gave nothing. When he reached the February entry, his jaw moved once. "You wrote that you made the wrong call." "I did. Most men would call it bad weather." "It was bad weather," Elias said, "and I still made the wrong call." Thomas read the sentence again. Then he turned the page and found the first fence incident. His eyes changed. Not much. Enough. He read all 4 entries twice. January 11th, January 26th, February 9th, February 23rd, east boundary, posts pulled not snapped, ground disturbance inconsistent with frost heave, repairs completed. Thomas closed the journal slowly. "You think someone pulled them? I think the ground says someone pulled them. You have a name in mind." "I have observations," Elias said. "Names are your business unless I see the man do it." Thomas looked at him across the table, and for the first time there was no test in his eyes. Only attention. From the back of the house came the soft stop of footsteps. Elias turned. Mara Red Willow stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame. She wore a dark skirt, a work shirt rolled at the sleeves, and her hair braided tight. For a moment, all the steadiness she had trained into herself seemed to gather hard around her face, holding back whatever had tried to rise when she saw him. "Elias," she said. He stood. "Mara." Her eyes moved over him carefully. Not like Thomas measuring damage, like someone counting what had returned and what had been spent getting there. "You look like Cold Knife kept part of you," she said. "It tried. And the heifer North Gully. February storm. I went too late. Visibility was gone." She came to the table and looked at the open journal. "You went because she was down, yes. And waited too long to turn back, yes." Mara looked up at him. That was not poor character. That was the wrong outcome from the right instinct. Elias said nothing. Some things were too generous to touch carelessly. Thomas sat back. "I said we would have a different conversation if you came back." "Yes, sir. The northern sections need permanent management. Cold Knife has cost me 3 hands in 4 years. You know that land now? Better than any man I have. I can offer steady work housing a share arrangement after the first year if the numbers hold." Elias looked at Thomas, then at Mara. "I'm grateful," he said. "But I did not ride back only for work." Mara did not look away. "I came back for the chance I asked for before winter, to show that what I have is not nothing." Thomas turned his gaze to his daughter. Mara's hands rested flat on the table. Strong hands, capable hands, hands that had written ledgers, mended, harness-checked water in darkness, folded 4 words into a coat pocket. "You showed it," she said quietly. "That was never the question." Elias held still. "What was the question?" "Whether you would stay," she said. "Men leave before they leave. They stop caring about the work first. They stop seeing what needs doing. They look past the trouble because they think no one will know the difference." Her eyes dropped to the journal. "You knew the difference." Before Elias could answer, hoofbeats sounded in the yard. All 3 turned. Thomas rose first. Mara followed. Elias knew the shape of that silence before anyone spoke. It was the silence of trouble arriving with clean boots. Silas Crowder stood in the yard with a lawyer beside him. The lawyer was narrow-faced and black-coated, holding a leather satchel under one arm. Silas wore the same pleasant expression he had worn at Bell's pump, but it sat tighter now. Thomas opened the door. Crowder. Red Willow, Silas said. I came to settle a matter before it grows inconvenient. Matters that ride in with lawyers are already inconvenient. The lawyer stepped forward. Mr. Aldrich, I represent Mr. Crowder regarding a boundary ambiguity between the Crowder East Holdings and your northern pasture. Mara stepped onto the porch beside her father. There is no ambiguity. Aldrich turned to her with a polished little nod. Miss Red Willow, old territorial descriptions are often less precise than families believe. Mara's face did not change. The boundary has stood for more than 20 years. Silas smiled. Fences move, weather moves them, men repair them wrong. A few feet here and there become acres over time. Elias felt the journal under his arm like something alive. Mara looked at Silas, then toward the north, though the pasture was miles away. The east boundary, she said. Aldrich blinked. Silas did not. Mara's eyes came back to him sharp and steady. You chose the section where the posts were pulled. The yard went still. Silas's smile faded by 1 degree. I don't know what you mean. No, Elias said. But the ground does. Thomas's voice lowered. Inside. They went in because the kitchen table had become the place where truth was set down and weighed. Aldrich spread his papers. Silas stood behind him. Thomas remained standing. Mara sat and read every line put before her. Elias watched her face. Not fear, not confusion, work. After several minutes, Mara tapped one paragraph with her finger. This claim rests on a supposed uncertainty in the original northeast marker. That is correct, Aldrich said. The original survey will answer it. If it can be found. Mara looked at him then, and something in the room sharpened around her. A crooked man can bend a record for a season, but he cannot bend the land that remembers where it has always stood. Silas's eyes hardened. Thomas looked at Mara. The Territorial Archive. She nodded. The capital. Original field notes grant number chain of title. If the survey language matches the deed, this dies. I'll go, Thomas said. Elias said, we both go. Thomas turned. You just came back. I know the northern line now. And if I mean to manage this land, I need to learn how to defend it on paper as well as fence. Mara looked at him, and for the first time since he had come home, something like warmth moved openly through her eyes. They left before dawn. The ride to the capital took nearly 3 days. Thomas rode in silence most of the first day, but on the second night, beside a creek running high with snowmelt, he spoke of Mara's mother. Her name had been Margaret. She had loved the ranch, but feared the winter. Mara had been 11 when Margaret died. The morning after, while Thomas sat in the house unable to move, Mara walked out and checked the troughs because the cattle still needed water. That is who she is, Thomas said into the fire. Yes, Elias said. I know. Thomas looked at him then. For once he seemed less like a man testing another and more like a father tired from carrying a daughter's life alone. At the Territorial Archive, a clerk named Finch found the 1851 survey in a flat wooden box after 40 minutes of muttering behind shelves. Thomas and Elias read the field notes against Mara's transcription: creek bend, ridge marker, second limestone outcrop, bearing, distance. Every line matched. There was no ambiguity. They also pulled the chain of title because Mara had written in a note tucked beside the deed copy, "Pull everything Aldrich might use." There, in an old filing from years before, they found a dead notation from Silas's father, questioning the northeast corner but never serving dispute, never acting, never proving a claim. Silas had not found uncertainty. He had found dust and tried to sell it as law. They returned with certified copies wrapped in oilcloth. Mara met them in the yard before they reached the porch. She read their faces and exhaled before anyone spoke. You found it. We found it, Thomas said, and more. By sundown, the papers lay across the kitchen table. Mara read them all. Deputy Jonah Pike came the following morning, compared Elias's journal with the east boundary ground, and said the disturbances matched. Aldrich withdrew the claim within the week. Silas did not apologize. Men like Silas rarely did. But he rode past Red Willow Land, once saw Jonah Pike at the boundary with Thomas and Elias, and did not stop. That evening, after the county papers had been filed and the house had gone quiet, Elias placed a small folded note on the kitchen table. Mara looked at it. The stovepipe. Check it. I carried it all winter, he said. She picked it up with careful fingers and folded it once more along the softened crease. Then she put it into her own pocket. Ask me, she said. Elias looked at her directly as he had across the fence line months before. Mara Red Willow, he said, I am asking you plainly to marry me. I have little money, a winter behind me, a journal full of fence posts, and the intention to stay. If that is enough, I will spend the rest of my life proving it was enough. Mara held his gaze. Yes, she said. Outside, Thomas Red Willow stood in the yard longer than necessary, pretending to check a gate that did not need checking while the kitchen light burned warm behind him. The county attorney's office smelled of dust, old paper stove ash, and ink. Gerald Marsh sat behind a desk that had carried 19 years of land quarrels, cattle claims, unpaid notes, broken promises, and men who thought anger could make weak documents strong. He read the certified survey without speaking. He read the chain of title. He read the old notation Silas Crowder had tried to use as a blade. Then he read Deputy Jonah Pike's boundary report and Elias Many Horse's journal entries, all four of them written in the same plain hand. At last, Marsh took off his spectacles and laid them on the desk. This claim has no standing, he said. Mara Red Willow sat straight in the chair across from him, hands folded over the folder in her lap. Thomas stood by the window. Elias stood near the door because there were only 2 chairs and because standing felt natural after so many months of cold ground and hard news. That was our reading, Mara said. It is not a reading, Marsh said. It is a fact. The original survey and deed language match. The notation was never served, never advanced, never acted upon. It is dead paper. Then Aldrich knew. Elias said. Marsh looked at him. Aldrich knows land law. Yes, he knew. Silence settled over the room. Not surprised silence, but the kind that follows when a thing suspected becomes official. Marsh gathered the documents into a neat stack. I will send a formal response to Aldrich by Friday. Certified survey attached, chain of title attached, territorial code cited. I will also be writing a separate letter concerning his professional conduct. Mara's face did not change. To the Bar Association, Marsh almost smiled. You do read carefully, Miss Red Willow. I try not to make a habit of reading poorly. Thomas made a low sound that might have been approval. Marsh turned to Elias. Deputy Pike inspected the east boundary. His report agrees with your journal. Post-disturbance, repeated pattern, same section. He has already spoken with Crowder. What kind of conversation, Elias asked. The kind a man remembers before reaching for another fence post. Good, Thomas said. One word. Enough. The ride back from town was quiet. Spring had begun to soften the roads, and the horses stepped carefully through mud, where snowmelt had gathered in the low places. Mara rode between Thomas and Elias, her coat buttoned against the wind, the legal folder tied safely in her saddlebag. After a mile, she said, it is over. The legal part, Elias said. She looked ahead. Silas will cut his losses. Men like him do not like public defeat. They like quiet advantage. He has lost quiet. Thomas rode a few lengths ahead, but Elias saw his shoulders shift. He had heard. His father filed that notation, Elias said. Yes, Mara said, and never used it. That will sit with Thomas. It already is. They rode on. Some hurts did not need a hand laid on them right away. Some had to be carried until they found their own place to rest. The wedding was held 3 weeks later in the front room of the Red Willow house. Mara did not want a large gathering. She said so plainly, and Thomas accepted it with the relief of a man who had been prepared to endure more people than the day deserved. Ruth Spotted Elk stood beside the hearth in a dark dress, her silver braid pinned carefully. Deputy Jonah Pike came in clean boots with his hat in his hands and said little, which suited everyone. Gerald Marsh sent formal congratulations in a folded note which Mara read once and filed properly because even kind letters had their place. The minister was a practical man from the next town who understood that the ceremony was not the heart of the matter. The 2 people standing before him were. Elias wore his best coat, which was still not very good. Mara wore a dark blue dress Ruth had helped fit and hem plain and cut strong in color. She looked like herself, not softened into someone else's idea of a bride, not decorated past recognition. Herself steady and broad and beautiful in a way that asked no permission. When the words were spoken and answered, Elias looked at her. Well, Mara said. Well, he said. Ruth pressed a handkerchief under one eye and pretended not to. Thomas shook Elias's hand last. His grip was hard, but it held longer than a handshake required. For a moment the older man said nothing. His face had the same guarded stillness Elias had seen the first day by the gate, but the thing behind it had changed. "You came back," Thomas said. "Yes, sir. You kept account." "Yes, sir. You stood where you said you would stand." Elias swallowed. "I tried." Thomas's jaw worked once. Good. Then after a pause, quieter, "Come in for supper, son." The word landed harder than any blessing could have. The first year was not easy. Nothing worth keeping on Red Willow Land had ever been easy. Elias took full charge of Cold Knife in the northern sections. He rebuilt the east boundary with cedar posts, sunk deep enough that no quiet hand could pull them without leaving half the county to notice. Mara worked with Marsh to file a legal covenant recording the surveyed markers, the ridge bearing the limestone outcrop, the creek bend, and every measurement Silas had tried to blur. The attack on the land left the title stronger than it had been before, which Mara noted with dry satisfaction and no visible pleasure. Thomas kept his place at the supper table. Once, 2 weeks after the wedding, he cleared his throat and said they might prefer eating alone now. Mara set a third plate in front of his chair. Thomas looked at it, then at her, then sat down. He never raised the subject again. Ruth came often. Sometimes she brought herbs, sometimes bread, sometimes stories of Margaret Red Willow, Mara's mother, whose name had lived in the house mostly as silence. Ruth told small things. How Margaret sang badly and did not care. How she feared the first winter but learned the water lines anyway. How she had once told Ruth that Mara would either break the world's expectations or wear them out by refusing to notice them. Mara listened without looking, as if she needed to. Elias learned that was how she received what mattered. In October, 1 year after he had ridden north into Cold Knife frost, Mara told him at the kitchen table. Thomas had gone to bed. The dishes were stacked. The lamp made a circle of gold over the ledger, though Mara had not turned a page in 10 minutes. "Elias," she said. He looked up. Her voice was level. "Late April, I think." He sat very still. Then he put both hands flat on the table. "You are certain?" "I am a careful woman," she said. "I do not report things I am not certain of." For a moment he could not speak. Spring. A child in spring. Mara watched him with those steady eyes. "You should tell my father. You want me to tell him, he will want to hear it from you. Why?" "Because you are the man who came back from Cold Knife. He needs to hear that this house is moving forward from that man." Elias went to Thomas's door and knocked. Thomas opened before the second knock, as if he had been sitting awake listening to the house breathe. He looked at Elias's face and understood enough before a word was spoken. "Spring." Thomas asked. "Late April," Elias said. "She thinks." Thomas closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something old and tired had loosened in him. "She would be certain," he said. "Yes." Thomas put a hand on Elias's shoulder. "Not quickly, not lightly. That is good," he said. "That is good, son." The child came on a Thursday in late April, loud, strong, and angry at the world for having weather in it. Mara held her against her chest, hair damp, face, pale eyes bright with a kind of wonder Elias had never seen in her before. Tears stood on her cheeks and she made no attempt to hide them. "She is perfect," Elias said. "She is difficult," Mara said. "She has been here 1 minute and already made that plain." Ruth laughed softly from beside the bed. Thomas stood in the doorway with his hat in both hands, unable for once to disguise anything. He looked at Mara, then at the child, then at Elias. "What is her name?" he asked. Mara looked at Elias. Elias nodded. "Margaret," she said. "Margaret Red Willow." "Many horses." Thomas sat down as if his legs had finally received news the rest of him had known first. He put one hand over his mouth and said nothing for a long while. Ruth touched his shoulder. Old names return when they are invited properly. Years pass the way working years do, not gently but with shape. Margaret grew up knowing fence lines the way other children knew songs. Thomas taught her cattle counts. Mara taught her ledgers and deed language. Elias taught her how to set a post straight, how to read a horse's ears, how to watch a sky that meant to change. At 12, she checked the Cold Knife stovepipe herself because she had heard the story of the note. At 14, she walked the surveyed boundary markers with Mara and repeated each measurement until she could have found them in the dark. At 17, she stood beside Elias at the east boundary, driving staples into new cedar posts where old ones had finally rotted through. On the third afternoon, Margaret drove the last staple clean. She stepped back, studied the fence, and nodded once. "It is right," she said. Elias looked at the line. "Tight wire, deep posts, good work." "Yes," he said. "It is." She coiled the spare wire. "This is where you fixed the fence before anyone asked you, yes?" "Why?" Elias looked across the pasture, remembering flood mud, young Mara's serious eyes, and $14 in his pocket, because it needed doing. Margaret carried the tools toward the barn. She did not look back. She did not need to. Mara came out at evening and stood beside him at the fence. They were older now. Not old, but marked by weatherwork, child-rearing, grief, laughter, and the 1,000 small repairs that make a life hold. For a while they said nothing. Then Mara touched the top wire. "When I first saw you fix this fence, I thought you were either the most useful kind of man or the rarest kind." Elias looked at her. And now, she turned her hand under his and held it. Both. The kitchen light glowed behind them. Thomas was inside, with Margaret likely correcting her cattle figures, whether they needed correcting or not. Ruth had been gone 3 winters now, but her sayings remained in the house like hooks on the wall, useful when reached for. The land stretched wide before them, held by work record memory and blood. Elias thought of the first day at the gate, Thomas's hand on the rifle, Mara's first, no, the forward note, cold knife wind. Silas Crowder's folded lies, a wooden survey box in the Capitol, and a newborn child carrying an old name back into the world. A poor man cannot buy land with $14, but the right man can build a home with his word. He had not known that when he first rode in. He knew it now. He stood with Mara's hand in his, watching their daughter cross the yard with tools over one shoulder, and understood that nothing he had built had come cheaply. That was why it would last.